Nobody expected the quiet old man in rags to be America's most decorated living hero. But the restaurant owner was about to learn that the hard way. The autumn rain had been falling for hours in downtown Nashville, turning the sidewalks into mirrors that reflected the warm glow of restaurant windows. Inside the Golden Crown, the city's most exclusive steakhouse, crystal chandeliers cast elegant shadows across tables where politicians, celebrities, and business moguls dined on $100 steaks. But outside, huddled under the restaurant's ornate awning, sat a man who looked like he belonged in a completely different world. Thomas "Tank" Morrison, 73, pulled his worn military jacket tighter around his shoulders as the wind whipped through the alley. His gray beard was unkempt, his boots were cracked with age, and his jeans had seen better decades. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another homeless veteran, one of the invisible souls that people stepped around without a second glance. What they couldn't see was the small, carefully wrapped package tucked inside his jacket pocket. What they didn't know was that this quiet old man had once stood in the Oval Office while the President of the United States placed the nation's highest military honor around his neck, the Medal of Honor. But Tank wasn't here for recognition. He was here for a promise he'd made 50 years ago, and he was about to discover that some people need to learn respect the hard way. Tank checked his watch. 7:30 p.m. He was early, but that was military habit. Never be late, never be unprepared. He'd been waiting outside for 20 minutes, watching well-dressed patrons stream in and out of the restaurant's golden doors. Each time someone emerged, he'd scan their faces, hoping to recognize the man he was supposed to meet. The restaurant's valet, a young man in a crisp red vest, had noticed Tank almost immediately. First it was just curious glances, then concerned frowns. Now the valet was whispering urgently into his radio. "Yeah, we've got a situation out front," the valet muttered. "Some homeless guy has been camping under our awning for the past half hour. Customers are starting to notice." Tank could hear every word, but he stayed put. He'd been in worse situations than this. Much worse. Through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the warm interior couples laughing over wine, business deals being sealed with handshakes, families celebrating special occasions. It was a world of comfort and luxury, a world that felt a million miles away from the muddy foxholes of Vietnam, where he'd earned his reputation as the soldier who never left anyone behind. The restaurant's heavy brass doors swung open, and out stepped Marcus Whitfield, the owner of the Golden Crown. At 45, Marcus had built his restaurant empire from the ground up, transforming a single diner into a chain of upscale establishments. He was a man who prided himself on creating experiences for his wealthy clientele. Experiences that definitely didn't include having homeless people visible from the dining room. Marcus was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Tank's monthly veteran benefit. His hair was perfectly styled, his shoes gleamed, and his gold watch caught the light as he approached Tank with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said, his voice carrying that particular tone of forced politeness that barely concealed irritation. "I'm going to have to ask you to move along." Tank looked up slowly, his weathered face calm. "I'm waiting for someone." "Well, you can't wait here," Marcus replied, his smile fading. "This is private property, and you're making our guests uncomfortable." "I'll be gone soon," Tank said quietly. "My friend is meeting me here at 8. Marcus glanced at his watch, then back at Tank with obvious skepticism. "Your friend? Coming here?" He let out a small laugh. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm going to have to call security if you don't move along right now." Tank reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, a handwritten note. "Robert Chen asked me to meet him here. Said it was important." Marcus barely glanced at the note. "Robert Chen," he shook his head. "Sir, Robert Chen is one of our most valued customers. He's a federal judge. I seriously doubt he's meeting with—" He gestured vaguely at Tank's appearance. "With someone like me," Tank finished, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that Marcus didn't quite catch. "Look, I'm trying to be nice about this," Marcus said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "But you need to understand that this establishment has a certain standard. Our clientele expects a certain atmosphere, and having homeless people loitering outside doesn't exactly fit with that image. Tank studied Marcus for a long moment. He'd met men like this before, people who saw the world in terms of appearances, who judged a person's worth by their clothes or their bank account. He'd fought soldiers who died protecting the freedom of people like Marcus to build their businesses and live their comfortable lives. I served this country for 32 years, Tank said quietly. I think I can wait on a public sidewalk for 20 more minutes. Marcus's expression hardened. I don't care if you served for 100 years. This is my restaurant, and I want you gone. Now, what Marcus didn't know was that Tank had faced down enemy soldiers, survived behind enemy lines for 6 days, and saved 14 men under heavy fire, and he wasn't about to be intimidated by a restaurant owner with an attitude problem. Tank slowly stood up, his movement deliberate. At his full height he was still an imposing figure despite his age. Years of military training had given him a posture that never truly went away. Straight back, squared shoulders and eyes that had seen too much to be easily rattled. I'm not looking for trouble, Tank said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd commanded troops in combat. But I'm not leaving until I meet my friend. Marcus felt a flicker of something, uncertainty maybe, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Not in front of his valet, not in front of the customers who might be watching through the windows. That's it, Marcus snapped, pulling out his phone. I'm calling the police. You can explain to them why you're trespassing on my property. Go ahead, Tank said calmly. Called. Marcus dialed 911, his voice taking on a tone of exaggerated concern as he spoke to the dispatcher. Yes, I need someone at the Golden Crown restaurant on Broadway. We have a homeless individual who's refusing to leave our property and is harassing our customers. Tank listened to the call with a slight shake of his head. Harassing customers? He'd been sitting quietly under an awning, bothering no one. But he'd learned long ago that some people had a talent for reshaping reality to fit their narrative. While they waited for the police, more people began to notice the commotion. A few customers had gathered near the restaurant's windows, watching the scene unfold. Marcus was clearly enjoying the attention, playing the role of the responsible business owner dealing with a difficult situation. You know what your problem is? Marcus said, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. You people think the world owes you something just because you claim you served in the military. Well, let me tell you something. I work for everything I have. I built this business from nothing. I don't need to give handouts to every homeless vet who shows up at my door. Tank's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. I never asked you for a handout. Then what do you call sitting on my property, driving away my customers? I call it waiting for a friend, Tank replied. Something you might understand if you had any. That hit a nerve. Marcus stepped closer, his face flushing with anger. You want to get smart with me? You want to play games? When the cops get here, I'm pressing charges for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Tank reached into his jacket pocket and felt the small wrapped package. Inside was the medal, the highest honor his country could bestow. But more than that, it represented something Marcus would never understand. The willingness to sacrifice everything for others, to put duty before comfort, to stand up for what's right even when it costs you everything. The sound of sirens began to echo down the street. Here they come, Marcus said with satisfaction. Maybe now you'll learn some respect for private property. Tank looked at him with something that might have been pity. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. Two police officers approached, Officer Janet Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran of the Nashville PD, and Officer Mike Thompson, younger but equally professional. They'd both seen situations like this before, and they approached with the cautious neutrality that experience had taught them. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Rodriguez asked, looking between Marcus and Tank. Marcus immediately launched into his complaint. This man has been loitering on my property for over an hour, refusing to leave when asked. He's making my customers uncomfortable, and I want him removed for trespassing. Officer Rodriguez turned to Tank. Sir, is that accurate? Have you been asked to leave? I have, Tank said simply, but I'm waiting for someone. Judge Robert Chen asked me to meet him here at 8 o'clock. Marcus let out an exaggerated sigh. Officer, he's obviously lying. Judge Chen is one of our most distinguished customers. He would never. Marcus? A familiar voice interrupted from behind them. Everyone turned to see a man in his 60s approaching from the parking lot. Robert Chen was immediately recognizable. His photograph had been in the papers many times over his 20-year career as a federal judge. He was well-dressed, but not flashy, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Tank's face broke into the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him all evening. Judge Chen walked directly to Tank and embraced him warmly. Tank Morrison, you old warhorse. You look exactly the same as you did 50 years ago. Marcus's mouth fell open slightly. Judge Chen, you actually know this man. Know him? Judge Chen turned to Marcus with a mixture of surprise and growing displeasure. This man saved my life in Vietnam. He carried me 6 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in his leg and shrapnel in his back. But Judge Chen was about to reveal something that would make Marcus wish he'd never been born, because Tank Morrison wasn't just any veteran. Judge Chen looked around at the crowd, then back at Marcus. What exactly is going on here? Why are there police officers? Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. Sir, we received a call about a trespassing complaint. The restaurant owner wanted this gentleman removed from the property. Removed? Judge Chen's voice was rising with disbelief. You called the police on Tank Morrison? Marcus was beginning to realize he might have made a mistake, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. Look, Judge Chen, I had no way of knowing who he was. He looks like, well, he looks homeless. I was just trying to protect my business. Protect your business? Judge Chen's voice was getting sharper. From what? From one of the most decorated soldiers in American military history? The crowd was growing larger now, drawn by the commotion and the presence of police cars. People were pulling out phones, recording the confrontation. Marcus could see his restaurant's reputation beginning to crumble in real time. Judge Chen, Marcus said, trying to salvage the situation, surely you understand my position. I couldn't have known your position, Judge Chen interrupted. Your position should have been to treat every person with basic human dignity, regardless of how they're dressed. Tank placed a gentle hand on his old friend's arm. Robert, it's okay. No harm done. No, Tank, it's not okay. Judge Chen turned back to Marcus, his judicial authority evident in every word. Do you have any idea who you just tried to have arrested? Marcus shook his head, his confidence finally beginning to crack. Judge Chen's voice carried across the gathering crowd. This is Sergeant Major Thomas Morrison, United States Army, retired. In 1971, he single-handedly held off an enemy attack that would have overrun our position. He saved 14 men that day, including me. He fought for 6 hours with multiple wounds, refusing medical evacuation until every soldier under his command was safe. The crowd was dead silent now, hanging on every word. For his actions that day, Judge Chen continued, Tank Morrison was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration this country can bestow. He's met with 5 different presidents. He's a living American hero. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He looked around at the crowd, at the police officers, at the phones recording his humiliation. This was going to be all over social media within hours. But more than that, Judge Chen said, his voice softening slightly, he's the most humble, decent man I've ever known, and you just treated him like garbage because of how he looks. Tank reached into his jacket and pulled out the small wrapped package. Slowly, he unwrapped it, revealing the distinctive blue ribbon and gold star of the Medal of Honor. The crowd gasped audibly. I didn't come here to cause trouble, Tank said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. I came here to give this back to my friend. He handed the medal to Judge Chen. You said you wanted to see it again before the ceremony next week. Judge Chen took the medal with reverent hands. Tank's being inducted into the National Medal of Honor Museum's Hall of Fame, he explained to the crowd. He's one of only 68 living recipients. Marcus was speechless. He stood there, surrounded by dozens of people who had witnessed his treatment of a genuine American hero. The valet was staring at him in shock. His own customers were looking at him with disgust. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir," she said to Tank, "I want to personally apologize for any NDA and thank you for your service." Tank nodded graciously. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Officer Thompson, who had been quietly watching the entire exchange, approached Marcus. "Sir, I'd suggest you think real carefully about pressing any charges, because if this goes to court, every news outlet in the country is going to want to cover the story of how you tried to have a Medal of Honor recipient arrested for trespassing." Marcus looked around desperately, but there was no escape from the situation he'd created. I made a mistake," he said finally. "I apologize." Tank studied him for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. But Judge Chen wasn't done. "Marcus, you run a business that profits from the freedoms that men like Tank fought to protect. The least you could do is show some respect for the people who made your success possible." A woman in the crowd called out, "Shame on you." Others began to murmur in agreement. Marcus realized that his restaurant's reputation was hanging by a thread. "Please," he said, addressing the crowd, "I made an error in judgment. I would like to invite Sergeant Major Morrison and Judge Chen to be my guests for dinner. Anything you want on the house." Tank looked at Judge Chen, who shrugged. "What do you say, old friend? Are you hungry?" But Tank's response was about to teach Marcus a lesson in dignity that no amount of money could buy. Tank looked at Marcus for a long moment, then at the crowd of people who had witnessed the entire confrontation. He could see phones still recording, could see the mix of shame and expectation on Marcus's face. "Mr. Whitfield," Tank said quietly, "I appreciate the offer, but I don't need your charity." Marcus's face flushed. "It's not charity, it's an apology." "An apology would have been treating me with respect from the beginning," Tank replied. "An apology would have been giving me the benefit of the doubt instead of assuming the worst." The crowd was hanging on every word. This wasn't just about a restaurant incident anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and how we treat each other as human beings. "You want to make this right," Tank continued. "Here's how you do it. You learn from this. You remember that every person who walks past your restaurant, whether they're wearing a $1,000 suit or sleeping under a bridge, is a human being who deserves basic respect." Judge Chen smiled proudly at his old friend. "That's the Tank Morrison I remember." Tank handed the Medal of Honor back to Judge Chen. "Some things are more valuable than money," he said, looking directly at Marcus. "Honor, integrity, the willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." Marcus stood there, humiliated in front of dozens of people, his phone buzzing constantly with notifications as the videos of the confrontation began to spread online. "Sergeant Major Morrison," Officer Rodriguez said, "would you mind if I asked you something?" "Of course. After everything you've done for this country, after all you've sacrificed, how do you stay so calm when people treat you the way this man did?" Tank thought for a moment. "I've learned that how others treat you says everything about them and nothing about you. I know who I am. I know what I've done. And I know that most people, when they understand the truth, will do the right thing." He looked at Marcus again. "Even Mr. Whitfield here isn't a bad man. He just made a bad choice. We all do that sometime." The crowd began to disperse, but many people approached Tank to shake his hand and thank him for his service. A young veteran in the crowd, wearing Afghanistan war veteran cap, waited until the others had left. "Sergeant Major," the young man said, "I just wanted to say thank you, not just for your service, but for how you handled this. You showed more class in 10 minutes than most people show in a lifetime." Tank clapped the young veteran on the shoulder. "What's your name, son?" "David Martinez, Sergeant Major. I did 2 tours in Afghanistan." "Thank you for your service, David. And remember, you don't need anyone's permission to stand tall. You earned that right." As the crowd finally dispersed and the police officers left, Marcus found himself standing alone outside his restaurant. Through the windows, he could see his staff and customers talking animatedly about what they'd just witnessed. His phone was exploding with notifications. The videos were already going viral on social media. The hashtag #TankMorrison was trending, along with Medal of Honor and Golden Crown shame. Judge Chen and Tank were preparing to leave when Marcus approached them one more time. "Sergeant Major Morrison," Marcus said, his voice much quieter now, "I know you said you don't need my charity, and I respect that. But I want you to know that I'm going to make some changes around here." Tank stopped and turned back to him. "I'm going to start a program," Marcus continued. "Free meals for veterans, every day. And I'm going to put up a plaque in your honor, if you'll allow it." Tank studied him for a moment. "Keep your plaque. But the program for veterans? That's a good start." Marcus nodded. "I'll announce it tomorrow." As Tank and Judge Chen walked away toward their cars, Tank couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. He'd faced enemy fire, survived impossible odds, and been decorated by presidents. But sometimes the hardest battles were the small ones, the everyday moments where people revealed who they really were. "You know what, Robert?" Tank said as they reached Judge Chen's car. "What's that?" "I think that young man might actually learn something from tonight." Judge Chen smiled. "You always were an optimist." "Had to be," Tank replied. "Otherwise I never would have made it home from Vietnam to have dinner with an old friend." The next morning, Marcus Whitfield stood in front of his restaurant, looking at the small crowd of protesters who had gathered overnight. The videos had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of shares, and comments that ranged from outraged to supportive of Tank Morrison. His phone rang. It was his business partner. "Marcus, we have a problem. 3 corporate clients just canceled their event. The Veterans Affairs Office pulled their recommendation of our restaurant from their website. And the mayor's office called. They're reconsidering our contract for the city's holiday events." Marcus closed his eyes. He'd built his business over 20 years, and it was all falling apart because of 15 minutes of poor judgment. But as he stood there watching the protesters, something else was happening. News vans were arriving. Reporters were setting up cameras, and walking through the crowd, shaking hands with the protesters and speaking to reporters, was Tank Morrison. Marcus watched in amazement as Tank defended him. "Mr. Whitfield made a mistake," Tank was telling a reporter. "But he apologized, and he's committed to doing better." Sometimes that's all we can ask of people, that they learn and grow from their mistakes. A protester called out, "He called the police on you. He tried to have you arrested." Tank turned to address the crowd. "He did, and it was wrong. But I've seen real evil in my life, and this isn't it. This is just a man who let his assumptions cloud his judgment. If we destroy everyone who makes a mistake, we don't leave room for people to become better." Marcus felt something he hadn't expected. Shame. Yes, but also gratitude. This man, who had every right to be angry, was showing him more grace than he deserved. The reporter asked Tank what he wanted to see happen to the restaurant. "I want to see it become a place that lives up to its potential," Tank said. "Whitfield has promised to start serving free meals to veterans. If he follows through on that promise, then something good will have come from a bad situation." Marcus made a decision. He walked through the crowd, approached the reporter, and asked to make a statement. "I want to apologize publicly to Sergeant Major Morrison," Marcus said into the camera. "I judged him based on his appearance, and I was completely wrong. I've learned something important from this experience, and I'm committed to doing better." He took a deep breath. Effective immediately. The Golden Crown will serve free meals to any veteran, every day of the week. We're also partnering with local veterans organizations to provide job training and placement services. And we're establishing the Tank Morrison Fund to support homeless veterans in our community. Tank stepped forward and extended his hand to Marcus. "That's the kind of leadership this community needs." Marcus shook his hand, and for the first time since the whole ordeal began, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could turn this into something positive. 6 months later, the Golden Crown had served over 5,000 free meals to veterans, hired 15 veteran employees, and become a model for how businesses can support those who serve. Marcus learned that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the people you least expect, and Tank Morrison proved once again that true heroes don't seek recognition, they earn it through their actions. The story of Tank Morrison and the Golden Crown became more than just a viral video. It became a reminder that dignity isn't determined by the clothes you wear or the money in your pocket. It's determined by how you treat others, especially when you think no one is watching. Tank Morrison continues to live quietly, visiting schools to speak to young people about service and sacrifice. He never sought fame from the incident, but he used the attention to advocate for homeless veterans and the importance of treating everyone with respect. And Marcus Whitfield, he kept his promise. The Golden Crown became known not just for its expensive steaks, but for its commitment to serving those who served. The restaurant industry took notice, and similar programs began appearing in cities across the country. Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to reveal who we really are. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it also shows us who we can become. The medal may have been the highest honor the country could give, but Tank Morrison's greatest victory was proving that true strength comes not from what you've accomplished, but from how you use that strength to lift others up. In a world that often judges by appearances, Tank Morrison reminded us all that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. Sometimes they're sitting quietly on a bench, waiting for a friend, carrying their honor not on their chest, but in their heart. And sometimes, the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with dignity, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. The lesson is simple. Never judge a book by its cover. You never know when you might be standing face to face with a hero.